Hi, everybody. Our area is entertainment and sport, and I can't think of a better place to put those together than in the Olympics. Everything about them is to be interesting, up to date, relevant, and that's what we're going to be talking about. But sport also has one other element to it: surprise. It was a surprise to me to have my appendix removed a day and a half ago, which explains why I'm here talking to you in this mode about the Olympics. We're going to talk about the idea that from the marathon to Olympic Agenda 2020, we're going to talk about methods for adding sports to keep the Olympics entertaining. From 1896 to World War II, the host nations dominated. The traditional marathon was hugely important. It was a brilliant choice to have reintroduce the marathon in 1896, and even better, won by a Greek, Spyridon Louis. Other sports were added by the hosts to fill out an interesting program, starting with 44 in 1896, up to 130 by the Berlin Olympics. The first 5 Olympics were prior to World War I, the next 5 between World War I and World War II. Now, the red part indicates, the middle part indicates the medals won by the nation with the most. Red indicates a host nation. The host nation had the most medals in the first 5 games, not by a little bit. The US in 1904 earned 84% of all medals. So mainly the interest, and largely there was an interest problem with transportation at the time. So they were largely focused on the host nation athletes, and that was the selection for the sports. Now, in the next 5, the host nation won twice, the USA and Germany, and France was second. Also, the percentage of medals won by the nation with the greatest number were half what was happening in the first 5. So as it happens, there was greater interest placed in the second 5 games to have more general interest in the events, where the first 5 were kind of focused mostly on what made it interesting for the host nation. So as we span 1896 to 1936, to emphasize the significance of the marathon, won by Spyridon Louis in 1896, 40 years later, he was still so important that Hitler invited him to the 1936 Olympics and gave him the same kind of sapling given to all other winners. After World War II, with TV arriving, methods were created to add new sports to keep the games entertaining and profitable. From 1948 to 1992, demonstration sports were offered. They weren't medal events, but if they were successful, they could become medal events. These demonstration sports ended in 1992 due to the size of the games. From 1996 to 2000, there was still a former demonstration sport added. From 2000 to 2016, the IOC decided to freeze a number of sports federations at 28. Those are the ones that organize competition. And if a sports federation was dropped, then you could add new sports. Well, let's look at the period from 1948 to 2016 when there were demonstration sports. Let's look at the demonstration sports, and the dark type were those that didn't become continuing sports. Lacrosse, Swedish gymnastics, Finnish baseball, Australian rules football was held, Budo, which is a form of martial arts, Pelotavaska, which is a form of high water skiing, bowling, Pelotavaska again, and roller hockey. Now, the red printed sports became continuing sports: handball, tennis, badminton, baseball, judo for women, and taekwondo. Now, there were some other sports added. Well, they took away polo and handball, but sports were added for interest: judo, volleyball, judo for men, volleyball, but judo was dropped and added again, archery, table tennis, softball, and the triathlon. These are relevant sports, and they came out of the demonstration sports, which actually worked pretty well, except unfortunately they didn't get medals. Now here we are from 2004 to 2016, maintaining the 28 sports federations. A decision that was kind of a cumbersome system. Now the decision was made to drop baseball in 2012. All right, I get that. Baseball would not allow the professional athletes to compete. Because the Olympics wanted only the best, okay, you drop baseball. There was no reason to drop softball. It was reverse gender equity. Dropping a men's sport, you do not have to drop a women's sport. Well, as it happened, they added golf and rugby sevens. Those were really great ideas, but it was so cumbersome up until this time to try to maintain the sports federations at 28, but to make it worse, if it isn't broken, break it. In 2013, the IOC wanted to add another sport. They had to drop one. I'm pretty sure they were trying to add cricket. Well, as it was to drop a sport to add cricket, they decided to drop the modern pentathlon. Now, here's the problem. It's the only sport invented for the Olympics, and Baron de Coubertin did just that. He invented the sport for the Olympics. His descendants convinced them that his heritage would be diminished. So they decided not to drop modern pentathlon, and wanting to add something, incredibly bad idea, they decided to drop wrestling, which had been in the ancient Olympics. Big oops. When it came time to add a new sport, they said, all right, we're going to add wrestling back again. So there was no change. In 2013, there was such backlash. They decided, all right, we're not going to try to free sports federations. We have a new idea. We're going to call it Olympic Agenda 2020. The idea was that they would freeze, not federations, but the number of athletes. It was done in two versions. The easy one was for Tokyo 2020. They could ask to include any recognized sports, as long as the total came to less than 500 additional sports, above 10,500. In other words, 11,000. Then for 2024, the Paris organizers had to include any new sports as part of 10,500, meaning the number of athletes in continuing sports would have to be reduced by the number in new sports. Well, let's take a look at Olympic sports that are recognized. Well, there are 62 that are in the Olympics, 66 that are recognized and could be. No esports are in the Olympics, or recognized rather. There are no mind sports in the Olympics, but two could be bridge and chess. There are 7, I call them combat sports, physical direct control, like in boxing and wrestling. 6 more that could be. 39, I call them independent. You cannot interfere with your opponent, like say running, swimming, skiing. 29 that could be. Object sports, those are the control of basketball, soccer ball. 29 more could be. So there's quite a list of sports that are on an agenda that could be in the Olympics if asked. Now, under Olympic Agenda 2020. Now, Sport Accords, another organization, they have 19 more sports than in addition to the above. Those additional sports could make their way to recognition and could make their way to the Olympics. A small number have. It's a very dynamic program system to keep sports up and coming and interesting. Well, of the 66, there's 2 mind sports I mentioned, chess and bridge. 6 aeronautical sports, including hang gliding and skydiving. I'm not imagining skydiving into the Olympic Stadium in competition. 8 land and sea powered sports like Formula One. I don't think Lewis Hamilton is going to be a gold medal winner. Powerboating and motorcycle racing. 4 roller sports like roller derby and incline roller hockey. 5 frisbee sports, frisbee golf, guts frisbee. You could get an Olympic medal in guts frisbee. 3 climbing, 4 pool and billiards and pool. 4 outdoor bowls, including bocce and lawn bowls. 2 recreational court sports, racquetball, and squash. A couple fun sports, bowling and dance sport. We're going to have more to say about that. A water recreational sport, water skiing, 3 international sports, cricket and lacrosse. We're going to have some more to say about that and highlight. Breath holding, underwater hockey and underwater rugby, and cheer sport, or cheerleading as it's sometimes called. Hey, underwater rugby could be in the Olympics. Here you go. How about that sport? Okay, I'm kidding you. This is not underwater rugby. I really hope they didn't drown taking this picture. That's underwater rugby. You try to stuff a ball into a basket, and you better be good at holding your breath because breathing is a bad idea. It's not much of a spectator sport unless you're really good at holding your breath, though. All right, let's talk about what Tokyo did for 2020. They allowed a bit more than 10,500 athletes in the core sports and a bit less than 500 in the new sports. So they went a bit over 11,000, but they were allowed. The most brilliant sport to select was skateboarding. We saw young Sky Brown win. We saw athletes playing to win and really enjoying the competition. Sport climbing was added, surfing was added, karate and baseball and softball. So they went over 11,000 sports, 11,000 athletes. Now, Paris had a different situation. They were stuck with 10,500 and no more. So they arranged for 10,298 of the continuing core sports. But let's look back a moment. They did not decide on having karate, baseball, or softball because they didn't want to have to drop about 310, 314 from the continuing sports. But they did. So they continued skateboarding, sport climbing, and surfing. And why not have breakdancing, adding to 10,500? Now, I would think they don't need to have an Olympic trials in Paris for breakdancing. They can go down in the subway, in the Paris Metro underground, and pick some street performers down there for a few francs trying to get money. And every country you can do the same. Go to your public squares, and you can probably find some guys, men and women, that can compete in those sports. So they settled on 10,500. All right, well, let's move forward to LA 2028. Now, the fact is, I have not just been a bystander with LA 2028. For LA 2028, when the first bid book came out, I went over it and I saw all the sports were centered in the downtown of Los Angeles. I live in the LA area. And I wrote them an extensive letter about where to move the sports to and where to move to and what sports to move. They put me in contact with the architect, the chief architect of the game. We talked for a while, and he got my point. In fact, the second bid book included almost everything I suggested to him. But one other thing, he was not aware of Olympic Agenda 2020. So I then made some suggestions about what it meant and how to do it. Oh, there's one other thing I mentioned to you about the modern pentathlon. Remember that they tried to drop, well, this was another example of trying to keep sports interesting. The ancient Olympics had a pentathlon of skills an athlete needed, a warrior needed, I should say. You needed to be able to run, to jump, to throw the discus, to throw the javelin, and wrestle. Baron de Coubertin said, I'm going to upgrade that to Napoleon's era. Everybody was cavalry, so you had to jump a horse over hurdles. You had to fence, shoot, run, and swim. Isn't that a crazy combination of sports? Can you imagine anybody competing in that and training? I can, me. I trained for a year and a half before the 1968 Olympics. My aerospace company said, hey, good luck, but we got to replace you right away. You're a key individual. We need to have somebody do your work. Oh, by the way, you're going to lose your scholarship for a PhD. Well, okay. Handwriting was on the wall. That wasn't going to work. Well, I did get a PhD, and that's kind of why I'm talking to you right now. All right, so back to LA 2028. Because Paris 2024 will back up again, had skateboarding, sport climbing, and surfing for the second time, the IOC decided those are now core sports and must be offered. So these sports must be offered, and they are included within the 10,500. But I suggested do not have breakdancing. You'll have room for 32 athletes there. And I've been updating my data to the LA organizers ever since I first spoke to them. I said, you've got a break here because boxing, weightlifting, and modern pentathlon have been suspended. Boxing because of irregular judging, weightlifting because of performance-enhancing drugs, modern pentathlon because of cruelty to horses. They're all I don't know if boxing and weightlifting will make it for 2028. Modern pentathlon is trying to have obstacle courses to replace horseback riding. That would work. And that probably would have put me in the Olympics too. Anyway, so that there's room for 444, maybe plus 32 is 476. And those 476 can be made, I told them, add baseball and softball. I had suggested other things. Stand-up paddleboarding, I thought that was a good idea. And then I thought maybe an e-sport, but the International Olympic Committee keeps going back and forth about what they would and wouldn't offer. So I didn't think there was anything reliable there. I thought about lacrosse for quite a while, and that would be a hugely interesting thing for the US and Canada. The US and Canada in World Lacrosse has alternated first and second the last 2 years. The number 3 team is most interesting, the Iroquois Nationals, which spans, by the way, the US-Canadian border. The Iroquois Nationals are recognized because they invented lacrosse, and the World Lacrosse Federation has decided to have the World Lacrosse Championships in 2033 in San Diego, south of Los Angeles, to encourage Los Angeles to have lacrosse. And they're also actively working with the International Olympic Committee to name the Iroquois Nationals as a team in the Olympics. Let them work. Well, they've had refugee teams, so they would like to have the Iroquois Nationals. Now, that would this would fit under 10,500, but any of these sports that have to be offered, the same number of athletes would have to be deleted from the core sports. But Paris already did that, so I told LA they could do that. There was one other thing I pointed out. It was a big deal when this guy from Tonga came in all oiled up in both the Summer and Winter Olympics. So the Iroquois could bring some traditional clothing or symbolism to the games, and that would be hugely interesting. Now that brings us to Brisbane 2032, and the problem is we don't know exactly what LA 2028 is going to do. But I've been working with providing information to Brisbane 2032 about possibilities. What I did say is that skateboarding, surfing, and sport climbing, there will be room for it in a core sport. But instead of baseball, softball, and lacrosse in Australia, cricket in netball would make would raise the interest level of the Australian people to support the games. So I suggested definitely having cricket and netball. And since then, I suggested to some of my friends in Australia to contact the organizing committee. And it didn't take much because a lot of people in cricket and netball have been contacting the organizers. There's a really good chance that cricket and netball will be offered. To show you how well Olympic Agenda 2020 has kept the games vital, skateboarding, surfing, and sport climbing have become core sports, and there's a really good chance for lacrosse, cricket, and netball to be included. So imagine the Iroquois Nationals in the Olympics with symbolism. That would be hugely popular, I think. Well, anyway, I wish I could be there to speak, to work with you all, but the little appendix thing, the coming out party for the appendix stopped that. I wish everybody the best.